Are you ready to find the source of the loop with me today? If yes, you're warmly invited to join today's episode. If you're not ready to learn already where the loop is coming from and where it is belonging to, and if this is too hard, what I'm telling you here, you can come back anytime. I suggest you kick back, make yourself a lovely warm beverage, and enjoy the show. See, I have it easy here. I don't have to be always nice to everybody because my reputation is ruined already anyway. And I can also show weakness at the same time. I told you in the last episode that I'm a poor casting addict and that I have a different approach to things and that I have found the connection to the past and to the true reality of fly casting, stemming from the big Alexander Grant, Sandy Batten, aka Sandy B. And this dude was working with the form of vibration, outcasting everybody for 100 years, no doubt about that. And he was also tuning his rods that he built with the help of a tuning fork. Let that stand there as a pillar in history for now. And look quickly at what I have prepared for you. A stickman graphic. And this is roughly what you know about fly casting. You are supposed to move the rod from here to there, accelerate it into a stop, and a loop flies out here this way. And we have to accelerate it into that way, and the loop of whatever shape that is flies out that way. Yeah, okay? And I am saying that this loop thing is inconsistent and incorrect because it doesn't fit in the definition of a loop per its definition, and that it's only called a loop and a made-up marketing thing like Coca-Cola or Santa Claus. Because if you can control the process from here to there, every shot, every cast will look exactly the same. You don't even have to worry about loop shapes because every cast shape will look the same. And if you're ready, that I can show you now why I have this crazy funky hat up on, and also what this here has to do with all this two-dimensional and three-dimensional thinking, now is the time. Let me get this a little bit closer here. This part where the cast is actually happening is not two-dimensional. It is not flat. Imagine if you would adhere. Oh, that's not a good one here. Oh, hold on. If you would keep the straight line path absolutely straight here, you see what I mean. Yeah. And it was two-dimensional, and it would be absolutely straight. This line here would have to crash in itself because it would be following the rod tip as it is usually propagated, and then would have to crash somewhere here straight away if it was straight. Huh? But, and you probably won't deny that, fly casting is three-dimensional, and it rarely happens that a line crashes in here. I'll show you later what casters do to avoid this crash here. Very, very interesting. Now let me show you what I have prepared here for you in a three-dimensional sense, because let's get back to history first too. Even before Alexander Grant, there was a dude who wrote the first book where the loop was mentioned in fly casting. And that book is called The Angler and the Loop Rod from David Webster. You can look that up. That is all. The whole book is online. And in that loop rod, the loop rod is defined, the loop on the loop rod is defined as the horse-haired loop at the end of the rod, which had no guides back in the day, where the line was looped to loop into, like as in Tenkara style fly fishing. That loop rod is called the loop rod because of that technical loop to looping in the line, and that has nothing to do with the cast at all. 1885 is the source of the first mentioning of the term loop in connection with fly casting, fly fishing in general. It has actually, that book has nothing in it about casting at all. Nevertheless, I say fly casting is three-dimensional, which the cool cast is showing in a very obvious way. And that is also the way how I come up with all this funky stuff here. Let me show you what I have prepared now and explain me a funky hat that I'm wearing too at the same time, or very shortly as well. It's a bit crazy here, but what I want to show you is fly casting is three-dimensional. If it was two-dimensional and the straight line path would be the straight line path, the line would crash here. Yeah. Let me show you this here. Imagine that cone here would be the path of the rod tip. The path of the rod tip, and that was still round, and we're going to cut this straight now. Huh? But, and you have it easier to see on camera. I noticed this earlier. Give me 1 minute here to make this a bit more better visible for you here. This thing here is a cone. It's like a conical path of the rod tip, and the approximation of this path is the straight line path of the rod tip here, yes, but the way of the rod tip is still a three-dimensional affair. And when the rod tip goes forth and back, then it is reoccurring only. A closed loop system by definition. And this is why, I thought I have the second cone here. This is why one cast or one time shocking the rod, producing a wave out this way here, is only a half loop, because the rod tip only went from here to there and not back where it would reoccur. That means the actual true loop of fly fishing is the path of the rod tip and not the line picture. Here in the future we try to call this here the cast or the shot. The cast or the shot. Because the actual true loop is only the way of the rod tip, like the rod tip furled from horsehair back in 1885, and this is only congruent with the definition of the loop. Okay? Now, and you say, yeah, well, but I want to cast straight and I want to make the straight line path and all that. And yes, that is true. But this is the only world you have, and this is the only way you are brought up, or we have been brought up, as I'm only developing this thinking here, okay? So this is the way we all have been brought up thinking the casting game. And that is, well, halfway fair enough if you don't know about the background about casting panic and control and open and closed loop control systems, but this is halfway fair enough as long as you're making straight forward, back and forward casts. But as soon as you're picking up a line from somewhere, or as soon as you are repositioning lines, as in Speycasting, you know, actually I think there's also a misconception about thinking casting in general, because many a times, or like actually often only 50% or less is the presentation of the forward cast, and half of the rest, or the rest, is the repositioning of the line so you can make a cast. That is why Speycasting is such a brilliant thinking game, and that is why the thinking of these cones makes more sense, or even more sense, and really truly sense, if you think that for Speycasting. Let me show you a couple of original drawings I made back in 2019 when I came up with all this knowledge from the stickman here, where you can see the sphere, or sorry, I'm jumping ahead because I'm kind of so there's so much information for me in this. That is sometimes hard for me to keep it all together. Let me finish this with the casting cone here first. So I think casting in three-dimensional cones, and that gets really interesting when you think about repositioning a line. See, you have to go away from this flat thinking here now, once and for all. And now comes my head out here, and hold on, I'll show you something else I found earlier on. You have to think you're casting as a three-dimensional affair. And I found that this lamp here is very good to show this to you. And within this, actually, you imagine yourself as a caster here in the center of this thing. Yeah, you get the idea. You don't need no 3D animation. You totally get it. And this is what I call the super bubble. This would be Alexander Grant's Rondello. This is the sum of all possible rod tip paths. I explained you that already in the FlyQ episode number 10, Flycasting Love. At the very end, probably very few of you have seen it. I put you in a little screen recording here. You can go back to that episode and watch the whole episode whenever you're thinking outside the box. That is not even a box, but only a flat sheet. Ding, ding, ding. Does not help your understanding of this game, okay? So take the box, fold it up, and take a balloon. Think of a balloon that is around where my rod tip is going. That is the outside surface of this balloon. I go into the balloon, the super bubble. It's very easy to control stuff. If I'm with my line outside that super bubble, it's harder to control because the degree of influence on that line is higher. That are some teachings out of the FlyQ knowledge that show Flycasting is three-dimensional and all the teachings are only two-dimensional. Watch how the two-dimensional teachings of the loop disappear as soon as I leave the casting plane and go into the third dimension. Seriously? Try to draw a box with your rod tip, and you see yourself that it's far easier to draw a sphere, a super bubble. That's what I recommend, and that is actually the first teachings of the fly cube. The sum of all possible rod tip paths is a sphere, and we call it the super bubble. Feel ready for it. Okay, so think of that casting cone like a little bit of like a martini glass standing within that whole. Let me pin this properly for you here. So and you see, three-dimensional fly casting is a lot of fun. You get to stand about in the middle of nowhere with crazy objects in your hand, explaining stuff to people they don't want to know. Nevertheless, what I'm saying to you is the sum of all possible. You stand in there, your rod tip is going outside in this sphere here, okay? Three-dimensional panopticon. And I want you to close your, no, keep your eyes open still, for that I can explain you this here. And imagine this now as as the sphere where the rod cast is going, yeah? You cut here straight through that bubble if you want to make a cast. And depending on how long or how short this cast is, you would go a long way with your rod for a long cast and a short way for a short cast. Nevertheless, the way we are brought up with casting is only a two-dimensional thinking of it. And this is just a first three-dimensional rondello approach that I'm showing you here with this. And if you look at, for example, casts like the Belgium cast or the Gebetsreuter style cast. I don't know if Gebetsreuter rings a bell. That was a famous Austrian fly caster, whose fly casting actually was not derived by fly casting, but by drying the silk lines for the famous rich people who went to his rivers to fish. But what he did to dry these silk lines was he got to the oval shape, very similar to the Belgium cast, and would cast that line around the oval so it keeps moving all the time. And if you see the super bubble thing, that was the easiest way to drive that line to dry without stopping it, without losing the tension on the system again. Huh? Three-dimensional, like, I mean, now think of it. I need you to close your eyes now and go back mentally to the school where the teacher writes something on the blackboard. Like, for example, the word Tuesday.
Curve up, retrace, swing right, vertical loop, over, under. We do not connect this letter to the rest of the word. In the U, undercurve, slant, the letter E, undercurve, loop, slant, the letter S, undercurve, retrace, curve back around and tie. Now under, over for the D, curve back around, close, continue up, slant. Now under, over for the A, curve back around, continue up, close, and slant. Now the Y. Over curve, slant, under curve, now slant to the descender, and over curve for the finish.
The teacher writes that word and da-da-da-da-da, and you learn how to write that shit, okay? For Speycasting, I need you to imagine that you have a blackboard around your rod tip that is like this sphere here. So you have a three-dimensional blackboard around yourself. You are in the middle of that thing, and you draw with the rod tip on the inside of that three-dimensional panopticon the rod tip path of a snap T, for example. Now, this is a hard thinking kind of an exercise for you. So what you do is close your eyes, imagine yourself in the middle of that super bubble, with the inside being a blackboard, and now you draw the rod tip path of a snap T on this inside blackboard of that super bubble. Hey? That is how we approach how we approach three-dimensionally Speycasting here now. And when you've done that exercise, also draw the path of the off-shoulder spey, of the off-shoulder snap T in this three-dimensional 3D panopticon blackboard. I will come up with a better word for that thing in the future, but are you with me? The teachings from school are only two-dimensional, but Flycasting is a three-dimensional affair. And the thing you call loops are only half loops. And expressions of rod vibration. That's some funky shit, hey? That's not like Bonanza from the 60s. And the loop is the path of the rod tip within. Now, for the very fit guys of you who know the cool cast, imagine how would a rod tip path blueprint of an inside cool cast bonker spey cast look on this here with either a waterborne or an airborne anchor. We talk about spey anchors in the future, and I hope you didn't lose your mind over this funky crazy shit here, and I hope you give the three-dimensional approach a little chance, because obviously like when you think about what you're missing out on your casting, this is what you have in the classic teachings, yeah? Flat Earth Society teachings. This is what we do here. Three-dimensional crazy fun shit. Now, the last thing I can say to you is like and subscribe to the channel. Go from 2D to 3D. Enjoy your casting, and please do not forget, we don't own the water.